The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of molten orange and crimson. The small town of Hollow Ridge, usually quiet at this hour, buzzed faintly with the distant hum of motorcycles. On the edge of the main road, near a weathered diner with flickering neon lights, a group of bikers roared into view, engines growling like restless beasts. Among the noise and chrome, a teenage girl sat on a cracked wooden bench outside the diner. Her leather jacket, scuffed and slightly too large for her frame, clung to her shoulders with the weight of untold stories. She tugged at the sleeves nervously, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes, sharp, alert, and unwavering, followed the bikers as they circled the parking lot. The leader of the gang, a broad-shouldered man with a tattoo snaking down his neck and a look that could make grown men flinch, leaned casually against his bike. His eyes scanned the girl and lingered on her jacket. "Look at this," he called, pointing, a smirk curling across his face. "What do we have here, boys? Some wannabe biker? Or a kid playing dress-up?" The rest of the gang erupted into laughter, the sound loud and cruel, bouncing off the diner walls. One of them leaned closer, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his voice dripping with mockery. "Seriously, kid, did your mommy make that for you? Or did you stitch it yourself after crying in your room?" The girl stiffened but didn't respond. She clenched her fists at her sides, the faint scuff of her boots against the dusty asphalt grounding her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear into the shadows, but something deep inside held her there, something she couldn't yet name. "Hey!" another biker shouted, circling her like a predator. "What's that patch, huh? Some kind of badge for being cute?" The girl's gaze dropped to the patch. It was small, rectangular, frayed at the edges and embroidered in faded threads. To anyone else, it looked like a childish emblem, a design meant to impress no one. But she knew the story behind it. Her father had given it to her years ago, before disappearing under mysterious circumstances that the town never quite understood. The patch was the symbol of his legacy, an emblem worn by the legendary biker who had once ruled these roads, a man who had defended the weak and punished the cruel. Her father had been a protector, a hero in a world that often had little mercy for the innocent. The bikers laughed louder, their voices echoing off the diner's neon sign. One of them nudged the leader, pointing at her jacket. "Man, she's nothing. Look at that. She probably couldn't even start a bike, let alone ride one. This is rich." The girl's jaw tightened. She felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of fear, anger, and something else, something like anticipation. She wasn't just a scared teenager in a jacket. She was carrying the weight of a name that demanded respect, even if they didn't know it yet. A younger biker, barely out of his teens, leaned down to get a closer look at the patch. "It's kinda cool, I guess," he said, though his voice carried uncertainty now. The laughter around him faltered slightly, but the leader waved it off with a dismissive gesture. "Cool. Kid, this is a joke. Look at the sleeves, they're too long, the leather's worn out, and what is that? Dirt? You call this biker chic?" The leader laughed again, loud and mocking, and revved his engine. The roar of the machine seemed to punctuate his ridicule, shaking dust from the gravel below. But then, something unexpected happened. The girl straightened her back, her movements small but deliberate. She reached slowly for the zipper on her jacket and tugged it up just enough to let the light catch the patch in full view. The design was simple but striking. A winged skull with crossed wrenches beneath it, stitched in faded gold and black thread. To the untrained eye, it was just another biker logo. But for anyone who knew the legends of Hollow Ridge, this emblem was sacred, a mark that commanded fear, respect, and silence. The leader squinted, his smirk faltering as he leaned closer. The other bikers noticed the change in his demeanor and followed suit, their laughter dying in the air like mist in the early evening. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "My father wore this patch," she said, her tone calm but firm. "And anyone who mocks it, well, they usually regret it." The group shifted uneasily. The leader's eyes narrowed, not with anger now, but with recognition. Memories of the old biker, the man who had vanished years ago, flashed in his mind. Stories of his bravery, his skill, and his unbreakable code of honor were whispered throughout the gang, legends they had all grown up hearing. And now, standing before them was his daughter. For a moment the air felt heavy with unspoken tension. The din of engines and laughter that had filled the parking lot moments ago vanished into silence. Even the neon sign above the diner seemed to flicker in acknowledgement, casting a dim, flickering glow over the girl's jacket and the patch that had sparked both curiosity and fear. The girl took a slow step forward, her eyes scanning the bikers with quiet determination. "You can laugh all you want," she said, "but don't forget, my father taught me what it means to protect the people who can't protect themselves. And I've been learning from the best." The leader swallowed hard, the smirk on his face gone now. He glanced at the others, noticing the change in their expressions, some awe, some caution, and some barely concealed fear. The patch wasn't just decoration, it was a warning, a symbol that this girl, despite her age, carried the legacy of a legend. And for the first time, the bikers realized they might have underestimated her. The girl didn't wait for their response. She stayed rooted on the cracked wooden bench, the sunset behind her painting her in shades of fire and shadow. The laughter had ended, replaced by a tense, almost reverent silence. And in that silence, the girl felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not the power of strength or guns or engines, but the power of legacy, of respect and of quiet, unyielding courage. Tonight, the small town of Hollow Ridge would remember not just the girl in the jacket, but the story behind the patch and the lesson that sometimes even the smallest figure can hold the weight of legends. The silence hung over the parking lot like a thick fog, broken only by the faint hum of engines idling. The teenage girl's gaze didn't waver. She could feel every eye on her, the tension radiating from the bikers like heat from a forge. The leader, a man whose presence usually commanded fear, now felt a strange uncertainty settle in his chest. He had heard stories of her father, tales of a biker who could intimidate the most ruthless men, a man whose name carried weight in every corner of the state, but he hadn't expected the daughter to carry herself with the same quiet intensity. For a long moment, no one spoke. The other bikers shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering as they took in the girl's calm, unflinching stance. Some of them exchanged nervous glances, realizing that they might have underestimated this seemingly fragile teenager. The leader stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. He leaned down, squinting at the patch again. "Wait a minute. That design..." His voice trailed off, replaced by a low whistle. The winged skull with crossed wrenches wasn't just any emblem. It was the mark of her father, a legend who had disappeared years ago under mysterious circumstances. He had once been the unspoken ruler of these roads, a man feared and respected in equal measure. The memory hit the leader like a punch. He recalled the stories from older bikers, the tales of how her father had defended the weak, stood up to corrupt officials, and never backed down from injustice. How he had disappeared without a trace, leaving a legacy that became almost mythical in the biker world. And now, his daughter was standing in front of him, wearing the very symbol that had once made men tremble. The leader's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of awe and hesitation. "You're his daughter," he said finally, almost as if saying it aloud made it real. The girl lifted her chin, letting the patch catch the last rays of the setting sun. Her voice was steady, firm, and unshakable. "Yes, and I know exactly who I am and what I stand for." The bikers around her were silent, the earlier laughter replaced with a mixture of disbelief and respect. They had come expecting an easy target, a teenage girl to mock and humiliate. Instead, they were confronted with the living legacy of one of the most respected figures in their world. One biker, younger and less confident than the others, finally spoke. "So, you're like him?" His voice was hesitant, unsure if he was asking a question or stating a fact. "I'm learning to be," the girl replied. Her gaze swept across the group, sharp and commanding yet calm. "My father taught me that respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes it's remembered. You all remember him, don't you?" The leader nodded slowly, a mix of recognition and caution in his eyes. "We do," he admitted. "And I didn't expect—" He paused, swallowing, unsure how to continue. "I didn't expect this." The girl smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You should have. My father's lessons didn't end with him, and I'm not here to be laughed at. I'm here to make sure his name is honored, and to remind anyone who dares to mock it that respect has consequences." The wind picked up, rustling the girl's hair and the edges of her jacket. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the lot, painting her in hues of orange and gold. The scene felt almost cinematic, one of those moments where time seems to slow, where every detail is sharpened and every heartbeat echoes loudly. The leader straightened, his usual arrogance subdued. "You've got guts," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I'll give you that. But do you understand what you're dealing with? These guys, they're not just some kids messing around. They've been running these roads for years." "I know," she replied calmly. "But guts alone aren't what saved my father. Strategy, courage, and knowing when to stand your ground, that's what made him a legend. And I've been learning all of it." Another biker, the one who had been leaning on his bike earlier, finally spoke up. "So, you're not scared of us?" The girl's eyes flickered with a flash of steel. "Fear doesn't matter. Respect does. And right now, I'm giving you a choice. Walk away and remember this moment, or test me and learn why my father's name still carries weight." For a moment, silence reigned. The leader studied her carefully, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He recognized the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her father to greatness. And in that fire he saw a warning. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, he nodded. "All right," he said, his tone measured. "You've earned our attention. Consider this a truce, for now." The other bikers relaxed slightly, though their eyes still lingered on the girl, with a mixture of respect and awe. They had come to laugh at her, to mock her jacket, to feel powerful. Instead, they were confronted with the living legacy of a legend, and they knew instinctively that this girl was not to be underestimated. The girl lowered her gaze briefly, her hand brushing the edge of the patch. A small smile played on her lips, not of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. She had survived the test of ridicule, and more importantly, she had reminded the world that her father's legacy was alive, carried in her very presence. The leader kicked his bike into gear, the roar breaking the silence in a controlled, deliberate way. He glanced back at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "See you around," he muttered, not as a threat but as an acknowledgement. The girl watched as the gang rode off, their engines fading into the distance. The echo of their departure left the parking lot strangely quiet, almost serene. She stood alone for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling over her. But instead of fear or doubt, she felt something else, pride. Pride in her jacket, in the patch, and in the legacy she carried. Pride in knowing that the laughter of strangers could not define her, and that sometimes the quietest girl in the room could command the loudest respect. As she turned back toward the diner, the glow of the neon lights reflecting off her jacket, she realized something important. This was just the beginning. The roads ahead were long, the challenges greater, but she was ready. Her father's name was not just a memory, it was a force, and now it lived in her. And for the first time in years, Hollow Ridge felt the stirrings of a legend reborn.